Josephine Taylor's empty stomach growled like a wild beast as she huddled by the dying campfire, her brother's cruel words still ringing in her ears. "You ain't worth the food you eat, Joe." The golden horizon of Wyoming territory stretched before her, vast and unforgiving in the autumn of 1878, offering neither comfort nor promise. "A person's gotta earn their keep," Vernon Taylor spat, towering over his younger sister. At 28, he was all that remained of Josephine's family after consumption had claimed their parents 2 winters ago. His once kind face had hardened with the responsibility and the whiskey he'd taken to drinking. "Pa always said you were the runt of the litter." Josephine pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 22, she was no child, but her slight frame and the lingering cough from her own brush with illness made her appear fragile. The wagon train they joined heading for Oregon had left them behind 3 days ago when their last ox died, leaving them stranded with a broken wagon wheel on the endless prairie. "I mended your shirts yesterday and gathered all the firewood," she reminded him softly, her voice carrying no challenge, merely stating facts. Vernon snorted, emptying the last drops from his flask. "And I hunted all day for that scrawny rabbit. Barely enough for one, let alone sharing with someone who just slows me down." He kicked dirt toward the fire, sending sparks flying. "I'm heading to that mining town we passed. Might find work, might not. You can stay with the wagon or follow. Makes no difference to me." "Vernon, please," Josephine's voice cracked. "It'll be dark soon." "Should have thought of that before being born so useless," he muttered, gathering his rifle and pack. Without a backward glance, he stalked off toward the distant smudge of buildings they'd spotted earlier. Alone, Josephine huddled closer to the dying embers. Her brother had changed since their parents' deaths, bitterness eating away at him like rust on iron. The tenderness he'd once shown her had vanished, replaced by resentment that grew with each hardship they faced. Night descended quickly on the prairie, bringing with it an unseasonable chill that penetrated her thin dress. Josephine contemplated following Vernon, but knew his mood would only worsen with drink. The wagon offered little shelter with its broken canvas, and the provisions were nearly gone. A wolf howled in the distance, its lonely cry echoing her own desolation. Josephine shivered, feeding the last twig to the feeble flames. She'd never felt so utterly abandoned, so worthless. Maybe Vernon was right. Maybe she was just a burden, taking up space and consuming resources without contributing enough. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jerked her from her thoughts. Josephine scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. Bandits? Indians? Either could mean death or worse. The rider emerged from the gathering darkness, his silhouette gradually taking form against the indigo sky. Tall and broad-shouldered atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, he approached with caution, keeping his hands visible. "Evening, madam," his deep voice carried across the space between them. "Noticed your fire from a ways back. Everything all right out here?" Josephine hesitated, one hand gripping the small knife hidden in her pocket, her only protection. Just resting, sir." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. As he stepped into the faint glow of the embers, Josephine could make out a weathered face with kind eyes beneath the wide brim of his hat. Not young, but not old either, perhaps 30 or so, with lines around his eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. "Name's Jackson Wade," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Most folks call me Jack. Ranch hand from the Double Creek spread about 10 miles east." His eyes took in the broken wagon, the dwindling fire, and her thin frame with a single sweep. "Seems like you might be in a spot of trouble." "My brother's gone to town," Josephine replied, not wanting to admit she'd been abandoned. "He'll be back shortly." Jack's expression told her he didn't believe it, but he nodded anyway. "Well, mind if I build up that fire for you? Night's fixing to get cold." Without waiting for an answer, he gathered wood from his saddlebags and coaxed the dying embers back to life. Soon, a proper fire blazed between them, Its warmth reaching Josephine's chilled bones from his saddlebags, Jack produced a small cast iron pot, a packet wrapped in cloth, and a canteen. "Hope you don't mind company for dinner. Always cook too much anyway." Her pride warred with her hunger as he efficiently set up a cooking tripod over the fire. The smell of coffee soon filled the air, followed by the rich aroma of beans and salt pork heating in the pot. Josephine's stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Jack pretended not to notice. "Beautiful country out here," he commented, stirring the pot. "Harsh sometimes, but beautiful all the same. Have you lived here long?" Josephine asked, desperate to focus on something besides the tantalizing smell of food. "Born and raised in Kentucky," he replied. "Came west after the war, needed open spaces after all that fighting." He didn't elaborate on which side he'd fought for, and Josephine didn't ask. The war had ended 13 years ago, but its divisions still ran deep. When the meal was ready, Jack pulled 2 tin plates from his pack. He filled one generously, and with a small bow that seemed incongruous with his rugged appearance, handed it to Josephine along with a spoon. "I couldn't possibly," she began. "Madam," Jack interrupted gently, "a meal tastes better shared. Would be doing me a favor, taking some of this off my hands." The simple kindness offering not just food but dignity brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. She accepted the plate with trembling hands, murmuring thanks that seemed wholly inadequate. They ate in companionable silence, the beans and pork the most delicious meal Josephine could remember. When she finished, Jack wordlessly offered seconds, which hunger compelled her to accept. "Your brother," Jack finally said, setting aside his empty plate. "He gone to Willow Creek," Josephine nodded. "He said there might be work in the mines." Jack's expression darkened slightly. "Willow Creek's no place for a lady." "Mining camp's rough, and the town that's grown up around it is rougher still." "We were heading to Oregon," Josephine explained, her voice small. "Our wagon broke down and the train moved on without us," Vernon said. She stopped, unwilling to repeat her brother's cruel assessment. "Said what?" Jack prompted gently. "That I wasn't worth the food I eat," she admitted, staring into the fire. "Maybe he's right. I've been sickly since winter." Jack's jaw tightened. "No one gets to decide another person's worth," he said firmly, "especially not over something as basic as food." He studied her for a moment. "What's your name?" "Josephine Taylor. Most call me Jo." "Well, Miss Josephine Taylor," he said with formal courtesy, "I believe you've got 2 choices. You can wait here for a brother who might not return, or you can accept my offer of escort to Double Creek Ranch." "Owner's always looking for help, and his wife's been wanting company. They're good people." Josephine hesitated. Going with a stranger carried its own dangers, but staying alone with winter approaching seemed equally perilous. "Why would you help me?" Jack's smile was warm in the firelight. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it. Because it's the right thing to do." He paused. "And because no one should be told they're not worth feeding." In that moment, looking into his honest eyes, Josephine made her decision. By morning's light, the abandoned wagon stood empty, a testament to dreams deferred and new ones just beginning. The journey to Double Creek Ranch took most of the day. Josephine rode behind Jack on his stallion, Rusty, her few possessions tied in a bundle behind the saddle. The terrain gradually changed from open prairie to gently rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. "Beautiful land," Jack commented as they crested a rise. Below them stretched a verdant valley, a silver ribbon of creek winding through it. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a cluster of buildings marked the ranch headquarters. Not as grand as some, but solid. The Millers built it from nothing 15 years ago. "How long have you worked for them?" Josephine asked, finding it easier to talk now that they'd shared miles and conversation. "Going on 8 years," Jack replied. "Mr. Miller took a chance on a worn-out soldier with nothing but his horse and saddle. Don't reckon I'll ever leave." As they approached the ranch, Josephine's anxiety returned. What if the Millers didn't want her? What if they saw the same worthless burden Vernon did? Jack sensed her tension. Mrs. Miller's bark is worse than her bite, he assured her. Pretends to be tough as rawhide, but has the softest heart in Wyoming territory. The main house was modest, but well-built, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. A plump woman with gray, streaked hair stepped out as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Jackson Wade, where have you been?" she called, her voice carrying a hint of Ireland in its cadence. "Thomas sent you for supplies yesterday morning." "Got delayed by a good deed, Mrs. Miller," Jack replied easily, helping Josephine dismount. "This here's Miss Josephine Taylor. Circumstances left her stranded, and I thought you might have use for an extra pair of hands around the place." Margaret Miller's sharp eyes took in Josephine's worn dress and thin frame. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and took Josephine's cold hands in her warm ones. "You poor child," she said. "Come inside this instant. You look half-starved and frozen through." Before Josephine could protest, she found herself whisked into the warm kitchen, seated at a wooden table and presented with a steaming mug of tea and a plate of fresh bread with butter. Jack tipped his hat and excused himself to tend to the horse, leaving Josephine alone with Mrs. Miller's motherly scrutiny. "Now then," the older woman said, sitting across from her, "Jackson's a man of few words. Tell me how you came to be in his company." Hesitantly at first, then with growing ease, Josephine related her story: her parents' death, the journey west with Vernon, and finally her abandonment. She omitted Vernon's cruelest words, but Mrs. Miller's perceptive gaze suggested she understood nonetheless. "Well, Mrs. Miller said when Josephine finished, it seems the good Lord brought you to our doorstep, and I don't question his ways. We've needed help since our daughter married and moved to Denver last spring." She assessed Josephine frankly. "You're too thin by half, but we'll fix that. Can you cook?" "Yes, madam, and so, my mother taught me both." "Good, and you're educated, can read and cipher," Josephine nodded. "My father was a schoolteacher before his health failed." Mrs. Miller smiled, the expression transforming her stern face. "Then you're exactly what we need. Thomas handles the books now, but his eyes aren't what they used to be. Room and board plus $5 a month, more when you're stronger and can take on more work. Does that sound fair?" The generosity overwhelmed Josephine. "More than fair, Mrs. Miller. I'm grateful for any opportunity." "Margaret," the older woman corrected, "we're not formal here. Thomas will be back with the men at sunset. Until then, finish your food and rest. You look dead on your feet." The small room under the eaves became Josephine's sanctuary. Clean, simple, with a narrow bed, a chest for her few belongings, and a window overlooking the valley. It was the first space that had truly been hers since leaving home. That evening, she met Thomas Miller, a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh and kind eyes that immediately set her at ease. The ranch hands 4 men, including Jack 8, at the long kitchen table, their rough manners tempered by obvious respect for the Millers. Jack caught her eye across the table and offered a reassuring smile. In that moment, gratitude washed over Josephine. From desperate abandonment to this warm kitchen in a single day, perhaps her worth wasn't measured by her brother's cruel assessment after all. Days at Double Creek Ranch quickly fell into a pleasant rhythm. Josephine helped Margaret with cooking and household chores, gradually taking on more responsibilities as her strength returned. Thomas, discovering her skill with numbers, enlisted her help with the ranch accounts, nodding approvingly at her neat figures and careful calculations. Jack remained a steady, quiet presence. Unlike the other hands who occasionally rode into town for entertainment, he spent most evenings at the ranch, often sitting on the porch whittling or repairing tack. Sometimes Josephine would join him, learning about ranch life or sharing stories of her childhood in Illinois. "Never been that far east," Jack admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson. "Farthest was St. Louis once, before the war. Too many people for my taste. I miss trees sometimes," Josephine confessed. "We had a big oak in our yard that I used to climb when I was little, Vernon Wood." She trailed off, the memory of her brother bringing familiar pain. You ever wonder what happened to him? Jack asked gently. Josephine sighed. Every day, despite everything, he's still my brother. She wrapped her shawl, a gift from Margaret, tighter around her shoulders. But I don't think I'd go back, even if he came looking. Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. Some bonds can't be mended once broken. As winter settled over the valley, Josephine flourished. Regular meals and rest restored her health, and Margaret's cooking put meat on her bones. The persistent cough disappeared, and color returned to her cheeks. Her dresses, sewn from fabric, ordered from Cheyenne, no longer hung on her frame, but fitted properly. A fact not unnoticed by the ranch hands, who suddenly found excuses to be near the house when she might be about. Jack noticed too, his eyes following her movements when he thought she wasn't looking. Josephine found herself growing increasingly aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the grace of his hands, the quiet strength he exuded without effort. Jack's a good man, Margaret commented one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough side by side. Never known him to look at a woman the way he looks at you. Josephine blushed, punching the dough with unnecessary vigor. He's kind to everyone. MMHMM, Margaret replied, unconvinced. Thomas says he's been working twice as hard lately, building up his savings. Man doesn't do that, unless he's planning for something or someone. The thought sent a flutter through Josephine's chest that she wasn't quite ready to examine. December brought heavy snow, transforming the ranch into a white wonderland. Christmas approached, and with it came preparations that kept everyone busy. Josephine helped Margaret bake special treats and sewed simple gifts for the household: handkerchiefs for the men, a shawl for Margaret, and for Jack, a leather pouch meticulously stitched to hold his pipe tobacco. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner, Thomas read the Nativity story from the family Bible while everyone gathered in the parlor. Afterward, Jack surprised them all by producing a fiddle and playing traditional carols, his rough fingers surprisingly nimble on the strings. I didn't know you played, Josephine said when he finished to enthusiastic applause. Jack smiled, a hint of shyness in his expression. Not something that comes up much on cattle drives. Later, as the celebration wound down, Jack asked Josephine to step onto the porch with him for a moment. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars blazing against the velvet sky. Wanted to give you this, he said, handing her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Figured it might get lost in the shuffle tomorrow. Josephine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicately carved wooden box. The lid featured an intricate design of wildflowers, paintbrush, lupine, and columbine rendered with remarkable skill. Jack, she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. It's beautiful. Open it, he urged softly. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a simple silver pendant on a chain, a small star with a tiny pearl at its center. It was my mother's, Jack explained, his voice husky. Only thing of hers I kept, been carrying it for years, waiting for. He cleared his throat. Well, waiting for the right person. Josephine looked up at him, tears pricking her eyes. I can't accept something so precious. You can if you understand what it means, Jack replied, his gaze steady on hers. It means I think you hang the moon and stars, Josephine Taylor. Means I've never met anyone braver or kinder or more worth knowing. He took a step closer, his breath frosting in the cold air. Don't expect anything in return. Just wanted you to know that from the moment I saw you by that campfire, I thought you were worth everything good this world has to offer. Before she could respond, he placed a gentle kiss on her forehead and retreated back into the house, leaving Josephine standing in the starlight, the pendant clutched in her trembling hand. January brought blizzards that isolated the ranch for weeks. Confined together, the household grew closer, spending evenings around the fire sharing stories and songs. Jack taught Josephine to play checkers, while she read aloud from one of Thomas's precious books, Dickens and Twain and occasionally Shakespeare, whose flowery language made the cowboys chuckle but listen attentively nonetheless. In these quiet moments, something deepened between Josephine and Jack. No declarations were made, No promises exchanged, but their growing affection was evident to everyone at Double Creek. "Boy's smitten," Thomas remarked to his wife one evening as they watched Jack help Josephine clear the supper dishes, their movements in perfect harmony. "Never seen him like this." Margaret smiled knowingly. "She feels the same, though she's cautious. That brother of hers did a number on her confidence." February brought a brief thaw, allowing Jack and 2 other hands to ride to Willow Creek for supplies. The night before their departure, Josephine found him on the porch, smoking his pipe. "Would you?" She began hesitantly. "Would you ask in town if anyone's heard of Vernon Taylor, just to know if he's all right?" Jack studied her face in the lantern light. "You sure?" "Might be better to let that chapter close." "I'm sure," she replied firmly. "I don't want to see him, but I need to know." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then I'll ask." 3 days later, the men returned, their horses laden with supplies. Josephine met them in the yard, her eyes immediately seeking Jack's face for news. Something in his expression made her heart sink. That evening, after chores were done, Jack found her in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with unusual vigor. "Found out about Vernon," he said without preamble. "He's alive, working the mines." "But Joe," he hesitated, "he's not the same man you knew." "Tell me," she insisted, wiping flour from her hands. Jack sighed. "Got himself a reputation as a mean drunk, been in and out of trouble fights, gambling debts." Marshall said he mentions having a sister sometimes when he's in his cups, claims she died on the trail. The words hit Josephine like physical blows. "He thinks I'm dead, or finds it easier than admitting he abandoned you," Jack replied gently. "Either way, he's not looking for you, Joe." Strangely, the news brought relief rather than pain. Vernon had made his choice, just as she had made hers. The last ties binding her to her old life had been severed, leaving her free to embrace the new one she was building. "Thank you for finding out," she said quietly. "It helps to know." Jack's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "You've got family here now, if you want it." The depth of meaning in his words wasn't lost on her. Josephine turned her hand to lace her fingers with his, the simple gesture an answer in itself. Spring came to Double Creek with a riot of wildflowers and new calves. Josephine, now a vital part of ranch operations, took over the household accounts completely and helped Margaret plant a vegetable garden that promised summer bounty. Jack, promoted to foreman after the previous one retired, was often in the field from dawn till dusk. Still, he found moments to spend with Josephine bringing her wildflowers, sharing coffee on the porch at sunrise, or simply sitting beside her at meals, their shoulders occasionally touching. In April, a letter arrived from Denver Margaret, and Thomas's daughter was expecting their first grandchild in September. The news sent the household into a flurry of excitement, with Margaret immediately beginning to knit tiny garments and Thomas walking about with a proud grandfather's smile already in place. "We'll be traveling to Denver in August," Margaret informed Josephine. "Stay through October, likely." "Think you can manage the house while we're gone?" The responsibility was daunting but thrilling. "Of course," Josephine assured her. "Everything will be fine." "Never doubted it," Margaret replied with a knowing smile. "You've become indispensable around here, especially to a certain foreman." Josephine blushed, but didn't deny it. Her feelings for Jack had grown steadily stronger, though neither had spoken openly of them. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a patience born of mutual respect. One warm evening in late May, Jack asked Josephine to ride with him to a special spot he wanted to show her. They set out after supper, Jack on Rusty and Josephine on a gentle mare named Daisy that Thomas had given her for Christmas. They rode through verdant meadows ablaze with flowers until they reached a secluded bend in the creek where a stand of cottonwoods provided dappled shade. A small cabin, weathered but sound, stood beside the water. "Line shack," Jack explained as they dismounted. "Used during roundup when the men work this section. Been fixing it up in my spare time." He led her inside, where Josephine was surprised to find not the sparse accommodations of a working cabin, but something approaching a proper home. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, shelves held books and a few dishes, and a handcrafted table with 2 chairs sat beneath the window. A curtain partially concealed a bed frame with a fresh mattress. "Jack," she breathed, turning in a slow circle. "What is this?" He removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Could be a home, if you wanted it." Josephine's heart began to race. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking if you do me the honor of becoming my wife," Jack said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it's not much to offer, it's everything," Josephine interrupted, stepping closer to him. "You're everything." Jack's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Josephine whispered. 1,000 times yes." He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her. A tender meeting of lips that deepened into something more passionate as Josephine responded with the feelings she'd harbored for months. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since Christmas." "Why did you wait so long?" she asked, her hands resting on his chest. "Wanted to be sure you were staying because you wanted to, not because you had nowhere else to go," he replied honestly. "Wanted you to know your own worth before I told you how much you're worth to me." The simple truth of his words brought tears to Josephine's eyes. From a woman deemed worthless by her own blood to one treasured beyond measure, the journey seemed impossible, yet perfectly right. They were married on a perfect June day beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration, along with neighboring ranchers and townsfolk who had come to know and respect Jack over the years. Josephine wore a dress of pale blue silk that Margaret had ordered from Denver, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Jack stood tall in a new suit, his usually weathered face smooth from a careful shave, his eyes never leaving Josephine as she walked toward him on Thomas's arm. The circuit preacher, passing through on his monthly rounds, performed the ceremony with dignified brevity. When Jack and Josephine exchanged simple gold bands and were pronounced husband and wife, a cheer went up from the assembled guests that startled birds from the trees. The celebration lasted well into the night, with feasting, dancing, and more than a few tearful congratulations. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, Jack took Josephine's hand and led her away from the revelry toward their cabin, now prepared for their first night as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" he asked as they walked beneath the star-strewn sky. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, squeezing his hand. "And grateful." Jack stopped, turning to face her. "Grateful for what?" Josephine reached up to touch his beloved face. "For a man who saw me when I was invisible. Who fed me when I was told I wasn't worth feeding. Who showed me that worth isn't something others bestow, but something that exists in simply being human." Jack kissed her then, a promise sealed beneath the vast Wyoming sky. Summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. Jack and Josephine settled into married life with surprising ease, as if they had always been meant to share this small cabin by the creek. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Days were filled with work, Jack with the cattle and ranch operations, Josephine dividing her time between their home and the main house, where she continued to help Margaret. In August, the Millers departed for Denver, leaving Josephine in charge of the household. The responsibility was substantial but not overwhelming. The ranch hands respected her authority, and with Jack as foreman, operations continued smoothly. Their evenings were precious simple meals shared at their table, conversation that flowed easily or comfortable silences that required no words. And nights. Nights were a revelation as they explored each other with tenderness and growing passion, their bodies communicating what sometimes couldn't be expressed in words. "Never thought I'd have this," Jack confessed one night as they lay entwined, the moonlight casting silver patterns through the window. "After the war, figured I'd live out my days alone, too much blood on my hands for happiness." Josephine propped herself on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. "The war's long over, Jack. Whatever you did then doesn't define who you are now." He traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You make me believe that. Make me believe in second chances." September brought cooler nights and the start of the fall roundup. Jack was gone from dawn till dusk most days, returning exhausted but satisfied with the progress. The ranch was prospering, with a healthy calf crop and strong prices promised at market. One evening, Jack returned to find Josephine sitting on the porch, an unusual stillness about her. When she looked up at his approach, her expression was a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "Everything all right?" he asked, concern immediate. Josephine smiled, though tears glistened in her eyes. "More than all right. Jack, I'm with child." He stared at her for a moment, processing her words. Then, with a whoop that probably startled cattle a mile away, he swept her into his arms, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently, suddenly fearful of harming her. "A baby," he breathed, his hand hovering over her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Due in spring," Josephine confirmed, placing his hand against her middle. "Dr. Wilson says I'm healthy and strong, no reason to worry." Jack dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her abdomen. "Hello in there," he whispered. "Your pa's already mighty proud of you." Josephine's fingers tangled in his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. From unwanted burden to beloved wife and mother to be the transformation seemed miraculous. October brought the Millers home, bubbling with news of their new grandson and bearing gifts for everyone at the ranch. When they learned of Josephine's pregnancy, their joy was immediate and genuine. "Another child to spoil," Margaret declared, already mentally cataloging the baby items stored in the attic. "This ranch needs young ones running about again." Thomas clapped Jack on the shoulder, his grip firm. "Fatherhood suits you already, son. Got that look about you." "What look is that?" Jack asked, bemused. "Terrified but determined," Thomas laughed. "Same look I had when our Sarah was on the way." As the pregnancy progressed, Josephine bloomed. The morning sickness passed quickly, and her energy remained good throughout the fall. Jack hovered protectively, insisting she rest frequently and bringing her special treats from town candied ginger for nausea, ribbons for her hair, a rocking chair he purchased from a furniture maker in Cheyenne. "You're spoiling me," Josephine protested as he installed the rocker by the fireplace, positioning it for optimal warmth and view out the window. "Just getting started," Jack replied with a grin. "Figure you and the little one deserve the best." December marked their first Christmas as a married couple. They celebrated twice, first at the main house with the entire ranch, then privately in their cabin on Christmas morning. Jack's gift to Josephine was a cradle he had crafted himself, the wood polished to a satiny finish and decorated with carved wildflowers like those on her jewelry box. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth rails. Her gift to him was a quilt she had secretly pieced together over the past months, each square representing something from their story: a campfire, a plate and spoon, a star, wildflowers, a wedding band. Jack traced the patterns with wonder. "This is our whole life together." "With room to add more squares as our story continues," Josephine replied, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded belly, where their child had just delivered a hearty kick. Winter settled over Double Creek Ranch with heavy snows and bitter winds. Jack insisted on moving back to the main house until spring, worried about Josephine being isolated at the cabin should complications arise. Though she protested, she was fine. Privately, Josephine was relieved. As her pregnancy advanced, the thought of being alone while Jack worked was increasingly unsettling. They took over the cozy bedroom off the kitchen, close to the heart of the house and its warmth. Margaret fussed over Josephine constantly, plying her with strengthening broths and herbal teas while dispensing wisdom about childbirth and infant care. "Women have been doing this since Eve," she assured Josephine when anxiety occasionally surfaced. "Your body knows what to do." February brought unusually heavy snow, effectively cutting off the ranch from town for weeks. Jack grew increasingly nervous as Josephine's time approached, worried about reaching the doctor when labor began. "Baby won't wait on clear roads," Thomas reminded him. "Margaret delivered Sarah with just me and a neighboring woman to help. If need be, we'll manage." March arrived with Josephine enormous and uncomfortable, the baby seemingly in no hurry to make an appearance. She waddled rather than walked, her back ached constantly, and sleep came in brief snatches between the child's energetic movements. "I think it's going to be a boy," she told Jack as he rubbed her aching feet one evening. "Only a boy would be this stubborn." Jack laughed. "Could be a girl with her mama's determination." The labor began on a clear, cold night when the moon was full. Josephine woke to a cramping pain that took her breath away, followed by the warm rush of water soaking the bed. "Jack," she gasped, shaking his shoulder. "It's time." What followed was a blur of activity. Margaret took charge immediately, sending Thomas to fetch Dr. Wilson and Jack to heat water and prepare clean linens. By dawn, Josephine was deep in the throes of labor, the contractions coming steadily closer together. Doctor Wilson arrived mid-morning, his calm presence reassuring as he examined Josephine and pronounced everything progressing normally. "First babies often take their time," he explained. "Patience is key." Patience seemed impossible as the hours stretched on, the pain intensifying until Josephine was certain she couldn't bear another contraction. Jack never left her side, wiping her brow, holding her hands, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for putting her in this condition. As afternoon faded into evening, Dr. Wilson announced it was time to push. With Jack supporting her shoulders and Margaret holding one knee, Josephine gathered her remaining strength and bore down with each contraction, determined to bring their child into the world. At precisely 8 o'clock, with a final, mighty effort, Josephine delivered a perfect daughter, red-faced, loud-lunged, and absolutely beautiful with a shock of dark hair like her father's. "A girl," Jack whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as doctor. Wilson placed the squalling infant on Josephine's chest. "We have a daughter." Exhausted but triumphant, Josephine gazed down at the tiny miracle they had created. "Hello, Elizabeth Margaret Wade," she said softly, having decided on the name months ago to honor both her mother and the woman who had become a second mother to her. Jack bent to kiss his wife's damp forehead, then gently touched his daughter's tiny hand. When those miniature fingers instinctively curled around his calloused one, his heart expanded with a love so powerful it left him breathless. "She's perfect," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mama, as doctor." Wilson and Margaret bustled about, cleaning up and making Josephine comfortable. Jack took his daughter in his arms for the first time. Looking down at her small, trusting face, he made a silent vow that she would never know the abandonment or cruelty her mother had experienced. She would grow up knowing her worth was immeasurable, her place in the world secure, her parents' love unfailing. Elizabeth, called Eliza for short, thrived from the start. She nursed vigorously, gained weight steadily, and quickly established herself as the center of the household's attention. Even the most grizzled ranch hands would stop by the house to peek at the baby, offering awkward congratulations and occasionally handmade toys whittled during winter evenings. By April, when the wildflowers began to carpet the meadows, Josephine felt strong enough to return to their cabin with Eliza. Their homecoming was a quiet celebration, Jack carrying his daughter across the threshold as carefully as he had carried his bride. Josephine following with a heart so full she could hardly speak. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eliza sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, Jack asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Do you ever regret it? Coming with me that day by the campfire?" Josephine looked at him in surprise. "How could I regret the best decision I ever made? You left everything behind," he pointed out. "Followed a stranger on nothing but faith." I left nothing worth keeping, she corrected gently, and gained everything worth having. She glanced down at their sleeping daughter. Besides, it wasn't just faith. It was the plate and spoon. Jack's brow furrowed in confusion. The plate and spoon. When Vernon told me I wasn't worth feeding, he was really saying I wasn't worth basic human dignity, Josephine explained. But you handed me that plate and spoon like it was the most natural thing in the world, like of course I deserved to eat, to be cared for. In that moment, I knew I could trust you. Jack was silent for a long moment, absorbing her words. Never thought a simple meal could change someone's life. It wasn't the meal, Josephine said softly. It was the kindness behind it, the recognition of my humanity when I'd been made to feel less than human. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You saw me, Jack, really saw me. That's why I followed you. That's why I loved you even before I knew what love was. Jack's arm tightened around her shoulders, drawing her and Eliza closer against his side. I saw the strongest, bravest woman I'd ever met, he murmured. Still do every day. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate girl huddled by a dying fire to the confident woman cradling her child beside the man she loved, it seemed almost impossible to reconcile these two versions of herself. Yet the transformation had been real, built step by step through kindness, respect, and love. Spring melted into summer, and Eliza grew from newborn to infant, developing a personality as sunny as the Wyoming skies. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's clear eyes, and a smile that could melt the sternest heart. Jack was besotted, carrying her about the ranch whenever possible, singing old Kentucky ballads to soothe her to sleep, and already planning which gentle pony would be her first mount. She's barely sitting up, Josephine laughed when he mentioned it. Let's not put her on a horse just yet. Never too early to plan, Jack insisted with a wink. She'll be the finest horsewoman in the territory. By Eliza's first birthday, Josephine was expecting their second child, due in late summer. The news delighted Jack, who had taken to fatherhood with natural ease and longed for a large family. Always wanted brothers and sisters growing up, he admitted as they lay in bed one night, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her abdomen. Being an only child was lonely. Well, Eliza certainly won't be lonely, Josephine replied, thinking of the bustling, loving household they were creating. Though we might need a bigger cabin if we keep expanding at this rate. Jack chuckled, pulling her closer. Already working on plans for an addition. Thomas offered that parcel by the East Meadow if we want to build something larger eventually. The generosity of the Millers continued to humble Josephine. They had become true family, grandparents to Eliza and mentors to the young couple as they navigated marriage and parenthood. June of 1881 marked Jack and Josephine's third wedding anniversary. To celebrate, Margaret insisted on watching Eliza overnight so the couple could have time alone together, a rare luxury with a busy toddler and another baby on the way. They rode to their special spot by the creek, where Jack had prepared a picnic of all Josephine's favorite foods. As they sat on a blanket beneath the cottonwoods, the afternoon sun dappling through the leaves, Josephine was struck by how far they had come. Did you ever imagine this? She asked, gesturing to encompass their life together, the ranch, their growing family, the deep contentment they had found. That day when you stopped at my campfire, Jack considered the question seriously. Hoped for it, maybe, didn't dare imagine it. He reached for her hand, his expression growing somber. I was so angry after the war. Felt like the world had no place for men like me, men who'd seen too much, done things they couldn't undo, when I found you. He paused, searching for words. It was like finding a reason again. A purpose beyond just surviving. Josephine squeezed his hand, understanding the gift of his honesty. Jack rarely spoke of the war or its aftermath, preferring to focus on the present and future rather than a past he couldn't change. We saved each other, she said simply. You from loneliness, me from abandonment, and now look at us. Jack's smile returned, warm and genuine. Best damn team in Wyoming territory. Their second child, a son they named Thomas Jackson Wade, arrived in August during a thunderstorm that shook the windows of the main house. The labor was shorter but more intense than Eliza's birth, leaving Josephine exhausted but triumphant as she cradled her son. "Got your mama's spirit," Jack observed as the newborn bellowed his displeasure at entering the world during such tumultuous weather. "And her determination." Little Thomas, called TJ by everyone except his grandmother who insisted on proper names, proved to be as different from his sister as day from night. Where Eliza was sunny and sociable, TJ was serious and observant. Where she was constantly in motion, he was content to watch the world from his cradle, taking everything in with solemn eyes. "He's going to be a thinker," Josephine predicted as she nursed him one evening, watching his eyes track Jack's movements around the cabin. "Maybe a rancher like his pa, maybe something else entirely." "Whatever makes him happy," Jack replied, settling Eliza on his lap with a picture book. "That's all I want for both of them, to find what makes them happy and have the courage to pursue it." As the children grew, so did Double Creek Ranch. Thomas Miller, recognizing Jack's skill with cattle and business acumen, gradually increased his responsibilities until Jack was effectively managing the entire operation. When Thomas suffered a mild heart attack in the spring of 1883, the arrangement became official. Jack would run the ranch, with the promise that he and Josephine would inherit it when the Millers passed. "Can't think of anyone better to carry on what Margaret and I built," Thomas said from his sick, waving away Jack's emotional thanks. "You're the son we never had, and Josephine's become the daughter we always wanted. Makes perfect sense to keep Double Creek in the family." The knowledge that they were building not just for themselves, but for future generations added new purpose to Jack and Josephine's efforts. They expanded the main house, adding a schoolroom where Josephine began teaching Eliza, TJ, and the children of neighboring ranchers. Jack invested in better breeding stock and modern equipment, determined to make Double Creek the most prosperous ranch in the county. In the fall of 1884, when Eliza was 5 and TJ 3, Josephine gave birth to their third child, another daughter they named Grace. With her arrival, their family felt complete, a perfect balance that fulfilled the dreams neither had dared to voice when they first met. Life wasn't without challenges. Drought threatened the ranch one summer, forcing Jack to drive the herd to distant pastures while Josephine managed everything at home. Illness swept through the community another year, leaving Josephine exhausted from nursing not only her own family, but neighboring ones as well. The children had the usual childhood accidents and ailments. Eliza broke her arm falling from an apple tree. TJ developed pneumonia one winter that left them all terrified. Baby Grace had colic that kept the household awake for weeks. Yet through it all, the foundation Jack and Josephine had built remained solid. Their partnership, begun with a simple act of kindness beside a dying campfire, strengthened with each challenge overcome, each joy shared, each year passed together. One evening in the summer of 1888, as they sat on the porch of their new home, a spacious 2-story house built on the rise overlooking the entire valley, Josephine watched their children playing in the twilight. Eliza, 9 and leggy as a young colt, was teaching TJ and Grace a game involving much running and laughter. "Penny for your thoughts," Jack said, settling beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Just thinking how rich we are," Josephine replied, accepting the cup with a smile. "Not in money, but in everything that matters." Jack followed her gaze to their children, his expression softening. "Richest man in Wyoming territory, that's me." They sat in companionable silence, sipping their coffee as darkness gathered and fireflies began to twinkle in the meadow. The children's game wound down, and they came trooping up to the porch, flushed and happy. "Story time, Papa?" Eliza asked, leaning against Jack's knee. Though growing into a young lady, she still loved her father's tales. "Which one tonight?" Jack asked, setting aside his coffee to pull Grace onto his lap while TJ settled at his feet. "Tell us how you and Mama met," TJ requested. It was his favorite story, though he'd heard it countless times. Jack glanced at Josephine, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well now, that's quite a tale. It all started with a plate and a spoon." As Jack's deep voice recounted their beginning, embellishing certain parts for dramatic effect and softening others for young ears, Josephine closed her eyes, letting the familiar story wash over her. From that desperate night when her worth had been denied to this moment of profound belonging, the journey still seemed miraculous. Her brother had been wrong. She had been worth feeding, worth saving, worth loving. Jack had seen it first, but over the years, Josephine had come to see it too. Her worth wasn't measured in usefulness or strength or what she could provide. It simply was intrinsic, immutable, as true as the stars above Double Creek Ranch. When Jack finished the story, the children clamored for another, but Josephine shook her head. "Bedtime now. You can have another story tomorrow." There were the usual protests, but eventually the children were herded inside, teeth brushed, prayers said, and tucked into their beds. When the house was quiet, Jack and Josephine returned to the porch, standing together at the railing to gaze out at their domain, the ranch buildings silhouetted against the star-strewn sky. Cattle dark shapes in the distant pastures, the creek a silver ribbon in the moonlight. 10 years, Jack mused, his arm around Josephine's waist. 10 years since I found you by that campfire. "Best 10 years of my life," Josephine replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I expect the next 10 will be even better." Jack turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I love you," Josephine weighed. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "And I love you, Jackson Wade," she answered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "For the plate and the spoon and everything since." As they stood wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vast Wyoming sky, Josephine knew with bone-deep certainty that this love, this family, this life they'd built together was what she had been meant for all along. Not abandonment and worthlessness, but belonging and value beyond measure. From a dying campfire to a thriving ranch, from a hungry girl to a beloved wife and mother, from worthless to priceless, Josephine's journey had been long but true, guided by the simple kindness of a man who had seen her value when she couldn't see it herself. And it had all begun with a plate and a spoon, offered freely to someone deemed unworthy of even that small dignity, proof that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could change not just a moment, but an entire life.